"I don't love you anymore, Margot." He said it the way someone cancels a reservation, calm, already thinking about the next thing. She had been standing at the kitchen counter when he said it, still holding a dish towel, still in the middle of ordinary Tuesday evening life. The kind of evening you do not expect to remember, the kind that turns out to be the last of something. His name was Douglas Hale, 39 years old, a corporate attorney at a firm that had his name on a parking space and his photo in a lobby he walked through every morning, like he owned the building and half the people in it. They had been married 11 years. She had believed genuinely and without reservation that they were happy. She found out later that the woman had been in the picture for 8 months. Her name was Bryn, 26 years old, a client liaison at his firm who laughed at everything he said and had not yet learned that she should not. Margot did not hate her. She understood her. She had once been that young and certain herself. The divorce took 4 months. Douglas's attorneys were efficient. He had been preparing longer than she knew. She signed the papers on a Wednesday morning in February, her hand steady, her face composed, while something deep inside her went very, very quiet, not broken, just closed, the way a window closes against a coming storm. You do not do it out of weakness. You do it because you have learned what weather costs. What Douglas did not know, what no one in their social circle in Charleston, South Carolina knew, was that 6 months after Margot walked out of that attorney's office, she would walk into a room that would rearrange everything. Douglas Hale thought he understood about the woman he had so easily set aside. But we are not there yet. Margot Elise Weston had grown up in the low country of South Carolina, the only child of a woman named Ruth, who sewed wedding dresses for other people her entire life, and a man named Henry Weston who had, as far as the world was concerned, spent 40 years running a small regional insurance brokerage out of a 2-room office in Beaufort. Henry wore khaki pants and button-down shirts, drove a pickup truck that was older than most of his clients' marriages, and was the kind of man who remembered every name, every birthday, every smallest detail of every person who ever walked through his door. He was not loud. He was not impressive in any way that the world rewards on first glance. He was simply, profoundly, consistently good. He died 3 years before the divorce. Margot had held his hand at the end, and he had told her 2 things. The first was that she was the finest thing that had ever happened to him. The second was that when the time came, she should call an attorney named Warren Aldous in Columbia. He had written the number in his careful, small handwriting on an index card and tucked it inside her copy of the Bible he gave her the year she turned 16. She had never moved it. She had never needed to. The morning after the divorce was finalized, she found it. She called Warren Aldous at 7:45 in the morning, standing on the small back porch of the rental house she had moved into the month before, watching the marsh grass move in the February cold. Warren Aldous was 64 years old, had managed Henry Weston's private affairs for 31 years, and had known this call was coming eventually with the patience of a man who understood that some things cannot be rushed. He came to her, drove 2 hours from Columbia to her little rented house with a soft leather briefcase and a thermos of coffee, and sat across from her at a folding table. She had not yet replaced with anything permanent because she had not yet decided what permanent looked like. He told her everything. Henry Weston had not been only an insurance broker. The brokerage had been real, and it had been successful, but it had been the front door to something much larger. Over 4 decades, Henry had quietly, methodically, without a single headline or press mention, built an investment holding company called Weston Reserve. Regional real estate, agricultural land across the Carolinas and Georgia, early positions in manufacturing companies that most people had never heard of, and that had grown steadily for 30 years without anyone paying much attention. He had used the returns to fund rural health clinics in counties where the nearest hospital was an hour away, to rebuild school libraries in towns that the state had stopped funding, to endow scholarships for the first-generation college students who came from the same low country he had come from. All of it done quietly, no building recognition sought, none accepted. Everything now belonged to Margot. She sat very still for a long moment. "How much?" she said. Warren folded his hands on the table, the way men do when they are about to say a number that will change a room. Conservatively, he said, 4.1 billion. The marsh grass moved outside the window. A bird called somewhere in the distance. The February light came in at the angle it comes in at when the world is cold and clear, and absolutely indifferent to what has just happened to you inside a room. Margot looked down at her hands. These hands. The hands that had cooked Douglas's dinners and attended his firm's Christmas parties, and smiled at the partners' wives and ironed his shirts on Sunday evenings while he watched football in the next room. These hands. She did not cry. Something far steadier than tears was moving through her, and it felt, for the first time in longer than she could honestly account for, like the ground under her feet was actually solid. She told no one. Not her closest friend, Carla, who loved her genuinely but processed emotions by talking loudly to everyone she knew. Not her cousin Deb, who would have meant well and caused chaos within the week. Not her mother Ruth, who was 71 and had enough to carry. She hired a private legal team in Columbia, 4 attorneys with no connection to Douglas's firm or their shared social world, and she spent the next 3 weeks in careful, quiet meetings, learning what her father had built and what she was now in a position to do with it. Then she went to find herself. She bought a house on Sullivan's Island, just outside Charleston, close enough to the water that she could hear it at night. Old wood floors, tall windows, a wide porch that faced the Atlantic. She planted a kitchen garden. She started running again, something she had stopped doing somewhere in the middle of her marriage, when there always seemed to be something more immediately useful to do with an hour. She read. She cooked things she had always wanted to cook. She let herself be quiet without filling the quiet with usefulness or apology. She was 38 years old, and she was beginning to understand, just getting started. It was through one of the Western Reserve's community development grants that she met Callaway Reed. He came recommended by Warren as the architect overseeing the new rural health clinic expansion projects, 3 clinics across the Lowcountry that the Reserve was funding. He was 44, had spent the better part of 2 decades designing medical facilities in underserved communities. Not the kind of architecture that wins awards or gets photographed for magazines, but the kind that makes people feel, the moment they walk through the door, that they were expected, that they belonged there, that someone thought about them before they arrived. He showed up at her house on a Thursday morning to discuss the first project, arriving exactly on time. Driving a truck that had seen considerable use, carrying a worn canvas portfolio and a paper cup of coffee he had picked up somewhere on the road from Beaufort. He found her on the porch with her reading glasses on and a set of county maps spread across the outdoor table, weighted down against the October breeze with a coffee mug and a small potted rosemary plant. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. "You started without me," he said. She looked up over the glasses. "I start everything without everyone. It's a habit." He came up the steps and looked at the maps. She had already marked 3 things he had been planning to mention. He noticed that she had also caught an access road issue that had taken him 2 site visits to identify. He did not say anything about it immediately. He pulled up a chair and sat down. His name, she learned that morning, was Callaway Reed. "Cal," he said when she called him Mr. Reed. He was from Orangeburg originally, had gone to Clemson on a scholarship, then to graduate school in Boston, then spent years working in places that needed the work done. He came back to the Lowcountry 4 years ago, he said, because he had gotten tired of designing things for people who already had enough and wanted to do something that actually mattered to him. She understood that. She did not say so. Not yet. They worked together for 2 months. He came twice a week, sometimes 3 times when a project decision required it. They argued about site placement and natural light and what a waiting room needed to feel like, so that a mother who had driven 40 minutes with a sick child did not feel, upon arrival, that she was an afterthought. Margot had opinions. Specific, informed, unapologetic. She had spent years managing things and people and logistics, and she had a precision about her thinking that caught him off guard the first few times, and that he respected more and more as the weeks went on. He disagreed with her on 3 things over those 2 months. They resolved every single one into something better than either of them had originally proposed. By the 2nd month, he was staying past the work. Not dramatically, just the way a conversation stays open past the point where the professional part of it has concluded. The late October light giving way to November gray, the marsh outside her windows going still and silver, the coffee replaced with wine, and then with quiet talk that covered ground neither of them had expected to cover with someone they had met to discuss building permits. He had been married once. For 7 years. His ex-wife was a good person, he said, and they had been wrong for each other in a way that had taken both of them too long to see clearly. He said it without bitterness, without performance. Just as a fact he had made peace with. She told him she was divorced. She did not tell him anything else yet. One evening in late November, he stopped at the door the way people stop when they have been thinking about something for a while and have finally decided to say it. He turned. "I'd like to take you to dinner," he said. "Not a working dinner, a real one." She looked at him. "What's the difference?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. At a working dinner, he said, "I'm looking at site plans." She waited. He met her eyes. "I'd rather look at you." She held his gaze for a beat. "2, Saturday," she said. 7 o'clock. He nodded once and walked out into the November dark. She closed the door and stood with her back against it for a moment. Her hand pressed flat to her sternum, feeling something move through her that she had been so long without, she had almost stopped recognizing it. Not hope exactly. Warmer than that. More certain. Saturday arrived. He came to her door in a dark jacket and brought a small bunch of flowers from the Beaufort Farmers Market. Late-season dahlias in deep rust and amber, not roses, which she had mentioned exactly once in passing during a conversation about the clinic gardens, a comment so offhand she had not registered making it. He had remembered. He handed them over without ceremony and waited while she put them in water. They went to a restaurant in the old part of Charleston. Small, warm, the kind of place where the tables are close enough together that the conversations overlap at the edges. They talked for 3.5 hours. The food was good. Neither of them paid it much attention. He asked about her father. She found herself telling him things she had not said aloud in years. About the clock on the kitchen wall of her childhood home that Henry had repaired 6 times rather than replace. About the way he had taught her to read a balance sheet when she was 14 years old, sitting at the dining room table after dinner, patient and exacting, and completely certain that she could understand it if she simply slowed down and looked carefully. About what it had felt like to hold his hand at the end and understand that the quietest person in any room she had ever been in had been the most extraordinary. Cal listened the way some people listen, not waiting to respond, just actually there. He walked her to her door at the end of the night. They stood on the porch in the cold air off the Atlantic. The sky was clear and full of stars, and the sound of the water was below everything else like a continuous low note. He reached out and touched her face, just the edge of his hand against her cheek, the warmth of it specific and deliberate against the cold. "Margot," he said, just her name. She did not answer. She simply closed her eyes. He kissed her slowly, the kind of kiss that has no agenda, no destination it is hurrying toward, the kind that stays fully in the moment it is in, because the moment is enough. When she opened her eyes, he was watching her with something quiet and entirely unguarded in his face, not triumph. Just presence. "Good night," he said. "Good night," she said. She went inside. She stood in the hallway for a long moment, not moving. The dahlias were on the kitchen counter. The Atlantic was still out there beyond the dunes, doing what it always does, completely unbothered by any of it. She thought, so this is what it feels like to be found. Meanwhile, in the background of all of this, something large was being prepared. Warren came to her in December with the proposal. The Western Reserve was reaching a turning point. 40 years of quiet operation had served Henry's intentions exactly as he had wanted. But the scale of what was now possible, the land holdings, the investment positions, the community development work, had reached a point where remaining invisible was actually limiting the good that could be done. Partners were making decisions without full information. Municipalities were leaving opportunity on the table because they did not know who held the power in certain transactions. The work needed a face. It needed Margot. He suggested a formal introduction event, a dinner, 250 guests, landowners, developers, investors, civic leaders, health system executives, regional bank presidents. People who had been in relationship with the reserve for years without knowing whose hand was actually on the wheel. It was time they knew. "You are not a supporting character," Warren said, with the firmness of a man who had waited 3 years to say it. "You are the whole story. It is time we introduced you properly." Invitations went out in January. Douglas Hale's law firm was on the list. Douglas accepted the invitation without looking twice at it. His firm had dealings with regional developers across the Carolinas, and he attended events like this routinely. Bryn would be with him. He expected, as he always did, to be noticed, to be relevant, to work the room with the ease of a man who had never once doubted his own importance. Margot saw his name on the guest list on a Tuesday afternoon in January. She read it once. She set the paper down. She went to her closet and began to think about what to wear. The event was held at the Belmont Charleston Place, the grand ballroom, crystal and candlelight, 250 people who collectively moved money and shaped the future of the Carolina lowlands. Douglas arrived in a charcoal suit he had bought last fall, Bryn beside him in a green satin dress, her hand on his arm with the ease of a woman who has not yet had reason to doubt the ground she is standing on. He found a table near the front. He ordered a whiskey. He felt, as he typically did in rooms like this, entirely comfortable. Warren Aldous stepped to the podium at 8 o'clock, and the room settled. He began the way he began everything, without hurry, without performance, with the measured authority of a man who had spent 30 years knowing more than most people in most rooms, and had never once needed to announce it. "I want to tell you tonight," he said, "about a man most of you never met." He told them about Henry Weston, the pickup truck and the khaki pants, the 2-room office in Beaufort, the 40 years of patient, disciplined, invisible work that had built something extraordinary, the rural health clinics, the school libraries, the scholarships, the land holdings across 2 states, the investment portfolio that had compounded quietly for 4 decades, while Henry went home every evening to a small house in the Low Country and had dinner with his wife and daughter, and never said a word to anyone about any of it. "He was the finest man I have ever known," Warren said, "and he raised a daughter who is every inch his equal in character and discipline and in grace." The room was very still. Henry Weston passed 3 years ago. Everything he built passed to his only child. She is in this room tonight. She is the active director of Weston Reserve. Her net worth stands at $4.1 billion. A murmur moved through the ballroom like a slow wave. Douglas set his glass down. Something shifted in his face, a kind of stillness that precedes understanding. "She has been the force behind every project, every grant, every investment this organization has made for the past 2 years," Warren continued. "She has done it with the same discipline her father used, quietly, purposefully, without requiring a single word of credit. But the work has grown too important, and the partnerships ahead too significant for that to continue. Tonight we introduce her properly." He looked toward the back of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, Margot Weston." The doors opened. She walked in, and the applause began before the room had fully registered what was happening. That instinctive response to something that commands a space without demanding it. She wore a deep sapphire gown, structured at the shoulders, and she walked across that ballroom floor with the unhurried confidence of a woman who had finally, after a very long time, stopped editing herself down to fit someone else's idea of appropriate. 250 people rose to their feet. Douglas Hale did not move. The color left his face in a single moment, the way heat leaves a room when the door opens in winter. He was looking at the woman he had called comfortable, the woman he had handed divorce papers to across a kitchen table 11 months ago. Walking into a room of 250 people like she had always known this was exactly where she was going, because she had. Bryn leaned toward him. "Douglas, do you know her?" He did not answer. Margot spoke from the front of the room for 12 minutes. She talked about her father's vision, about the work the reserve would continue to do, about the partnerships she was committed to building. She was clear and warm and entirely composed, and every word she said carried the weight of someone who had thought carefully about each one. She did not perform, she simply was. When she finished, 250 people gave her a standing ovation. Douglas was moving through the crowd before it fully settled. He left Bryn at the table without a word, without a glance back, and crossed the ballroom with the look of a man who has suddenly understood something he cannot unfeel. He reached her at the edge of the stage. People nearby noticed. He did not care. Margot. She turned. Her face was composed, not cold, not sharp. Just clear. He looked at her, and the composure that had carried him through 11 years of marriage and 40 years of professional performance was simply gone, not eroded. Gone. Look at you, he said. His voice was unsteady. Margot, I didn't know. I didn't know any of this. 11 years and I didn't even. His voice broke on the last word. He stopped. He looked at her the way a man looks when the full weight of a decision lands on him all at once. Not the intellectual understanding of it, but the actual, physical, irreversible weight. He reached for her hand. And then Douglas Hale, the man who had sat across a kitchen table from her, and slid divorce papers toward her, like a business transaction he had already moved past, went down on one knee in the middle of the Belmont Charleston Place ballroom in front of 250 people. A silence fell across the room like a hand laid gently over sound. Margot, he said. His voice was very low. I made the worst mistake of my life. I know that. I have known it for a long time. I am asking you, Douglas. Her voice was quiet, gentle, absolutely final, the way a locked door is final, not harsh, just closed. Please get up. He looked at her. Please, she said again. Stand up. He stood. His eyes were wet. People nearby were watching, and he no longer had the reflex to care. I forgive you, she said. She meant it the way her father had meant the things he said. Fully, without condition, without theater. I genuinely forgive you. She held his gaze. But forgiveness and going back are two different things, Douglas. They always were. I don't think you ever understood that about me. She looked at him for one more moment. Something in her face was not unkind. It was simply finished. I wish you well. I mean that too. She turned away. Cal had been watching from across the room. He came through the crowd the way he moved through everything. Steady, unhurried, completely certain of his direction. Dark suit. The kind of quiet energy that belongs to men who have spent their careers doing important work in rooms nobody photographs and never needed the validation of the photograph. He touched her elbow lightly when he reached her. She turned, and what happened to her face in that moment was not dramatic or performed. It was simply the particular expression a face makes when exactly the right person has arrived. You were extraordinary, he said quietly. You were watching, she said. The whole room was watching, he said, but I was watching you. She laughed, softly, the way laughter comes when it is not summoned, but simply present. The orchestra had started a slow piece in the far end of the ballroom. He looked toward it, then back at her. Dance with me. She raised an eyebrow. I should warn you. I took ballet for 9 years. He considered this with an expression of entirely genuine concern. I should warn you in return, he said, that I have almost no idea what I'm doing. Then pay attention, she said. She took his hand. They danced. She moved with the ease of someone in whom grace had become so natural it no longer announced itself. He was not trained, but he was attentive, and he held her with the particular confidence of a man who may be uncertain of the steps, but is completely certain of the person in his arms. They found their rhythm quickly. The room noticed. Conversations softened. Heads turned. At one point he said something low near her ear, and she tipped her head back and laughed, really laughed. The open, full kind she had misplaced somewhere in the middle of 11 years, and he drew her a fraction closer when she did, and the room felt it, that specific, unmistakable recognition of two people who are, without question, exactly where they are supposed to be. Douglas stood at the edge of the dance floor. He watched Cal look at Margot the way Douglas had not looked at anyone. Not Bryn, not Margot at her best, not anyone, in more years than he could honestly count, with his complete, undivided, unhurried attention, as if the rest of the ballroom had simply ceased to be relevant. Douglas understood then, not abstractly, in the way that lands in the chest rather than the mind. It had not been the $4.1 billion. It had never been about the money. He had thrown away a woman who was, in every way that actually mattered, extraordinary. Not because he hadn't known she was extraordinary, because he had stopped looking. He left without saying goodbye to anyone. Bryn caught up with him at the lobby doors, her heels sharp against the marble floor. Douglas. She touched his arm. Where are you going? The evening isn't over. He kept moving through the doors and out into the cold Charleston night. She followed him down the steps to the street where the valet had brought his car. "Are you seriously leaving?" He stood at the car. He opened the door. He got in. She stood in the cold in her green satin dress, certain he would turn around. He did not turn around. The window came down slowly. He looked at her across it, really looked, and what was in his eyes was not anger, not guilt, not even grief. It was the expression of a man who has finally been honest with himself for the first time in a very long time. And it is not a comfortable expression to wear. "I left a woman who loved me for 11 years, he said. "A woman who built a home, who showed up every day, who made everything around us work, and got nothing from me in return. Nothing." He stopped. "Tonight I watched her walk into a room of 250 people as one of the most powerful women in this region. I watched her dance with a man who has figured out the thing I never did. I got down on my knees in front of a ballroom full of people, and she looked at me with nothing but kindness." He looked away for a moment. When he looked back, his voice was very level. "I left my wife for you," he said, "and all I have is exactly what I deserve." Bryn opened her mouth. "Don't," he said quietly. The window went up. He drove away. She stood on the sidewalk outside the Bellman-Charleston place in the January cold, watching his taillights until they turned a corner and disappeared. Then she sat down on the steps, the green dress and the cold stone, her champagne glass still in her hand, and she cried, not for love. She had known for longer than she wanted to admit that what she had with Douglas was not love. She cried for the time she had spent betting on something that was never going to pay out, and for the version of herself that had thought this was the right table to sit at. Inside, the ballroom was still warm and full of light. Inside, Margot Weston was still dancing. In the months that followed, Douglas's fortunes changed with the quiet efficiency of a world correcting itself. 3 major real estate deals he had been positioning his firm to lead fell apart when the underlying land was found to be held by entities connected to Weston Reserve, whose new director declined to proceed with his firm's involvement. No drama, no confrontation. The decisions were made by people with information Douglas had not known to account for. His partners were measured about it. They moved him away from the regional development practice, his strongest area, toward a corporate advisory role that was respectable and utterly without the significance he had spent his career building toward. Bryn was gone by April. She left on a Tuesday neatly, without argument. She was 27 years old, and she was not going to spend what should have been the best years of her life waiting for a man to stop mourning a mistake he had made himself. She was not wrong. Douglas sat alone that Tuesday evening in the apartment he had moved to after the divorce and looked at his hands for a long time. A man his age, a man who had built a career on the ability to read situations quickly, to identify value, to act decisively. And he had looked at Margot Weston across a kitchen table for 11 years and not seen her. Not really. Not with any of the attention he gave to everything he considered important. "I did this," he said to the quiet apartment, "with my own very capable hands. I did this entirely to myself." The apartment did not disagree. Cal proposed in March. Not at a restaurant, not with an audience. On her front porch on Sullivan's Island, on a morning when the weather had not yet decided what it wanted to be, the light coming in low and pale over the water. She was in her running clothes, having just come in from the beach. She had sand on her shoes. He was sitting on the porch steps when she came up the path. He had a ring. Simple, specific, the kind chosen by someone who had paid attention for months. He did not give a speech. He looked up at her from the step and said, "I know who I am when I'm with you. I have not always been sure of that. I would like the chance to be this version of myself for the rest of my life, with you." She stood in her sand-covered running shoes and looked at him, and then looked past him at the ocean, which was doing what it always does, going about its own enormous business, entirely unimpressed. Then she looked back at him. "Yes," she said, like it was simple, because it was. He put the ring on her finger there on the porch steps, the beach behind them, the salt air around them. He kissed her, and she kissed him back with nothing guarded, nothing held back, the way you can only be with someone who has seen the full shape of you and made a deliberate choice. She called her mother Ruth that evening. Ruth was quiet on the other end of the line for a moment when Margot told her. "Baby," she said finally, "is he good to you?" "Yes," Margot said, "he really is." Ruth made a sound that was not quite a word, the particular sound of a mother who has spent 3 years worrying quietly and has just been given permission to stop. "Then your father would have loved him," she said. "And that's enough for me." They married in September, on the property of an old plantation home outside Beaufort that the Western Reserve had spent 2 years restoring as a community event space, the first wedding ever held there. The low country in September is heavy and warm and golden at the edges, the way a thing is when it is exactly at its peak. The marsh grass caught the evening light. The water was still. Warren Aldous sat in the front row and cried without any particular attempt to compose himself. And when people around him glanced over, he met their eyes without embarrassment and went right on crying. Ruth sat beside him. She had worn Henry's favorite color, and she held Warren's handkerchief without returning it. Cal's daughter from his previous marriage stood with him. She was 17, and she had decided somewhere in the previous 3 months, quietly and on her own terms, that she liked Margot. Not because Margot had tried to win her over, because Margot had not tried to win her over, had simply been present, consistent, interested without being intrusive, and had once spent 45 minutes helping her work through a chemistry problem without making her feel slow for not having gotten it herself. That had been enough. When Margot came down the aisle, a stone path through the garden, white dahlias everywhere, because she had told him once she had always loved dahlias, and he had remembered, Cal's daughter saw his face and looked away quickly. It was too private a thing to watch directly, the way a person's face looks when they understand that their life is better than they thought it was going to be. They built something together after that. He designed. She ran the reserve the way her father had run it, without fanfare, without press, with complete and consistent attention to the places and the people the work was actually for. New health clinics, a reading library in Walterboro, a scholarship endowment at 3 community colleges across the Low Country in Henry Weston's name, the name appearing in public for the first time, and only because Margot had decided he deserved that much. Cal's daughter came for holidays, and then started coming more than that, the way young people do when they have found a place that feels like theirs without anyone having forced the feeling. Sunday dinners ran long and loud, and sometimes went 3 hours past when anyone intended. Cal cooked with complete confidence and mixed results. Margot corrected things quietly from the other side of the kitchen, while appearing to be doing something else entirely. Ruth, who had started driving down from Beaufort every few weeks without much explanation, caught every single bit of this, and smiled into her wine glass and said nothing. There was a morning in late October, the first real cold snap of the year, coming in off the water, the marsh silver, and still in the early light. Margot was standing at the kitchen window with her coffee, watching the day arrive. Cal came up behind her and put his arms around her and rested his chin on her shoulder, and they stood like that for a while without needing to say anything. She thought about her father in his khaki pants and his old truck driving these roads for 40 years, doing the work and going home and saying nothing about it. She thought about the index card in the back of the Bible. She thought about the folding table and Warren's leather briefcase, and the number he had said to her in the voice of a man who understood that it would take a moment to land. She thought about the kitchen table and the dish towel, and Douglas sliding papers across toward her, like something he was already done with. It had not been an ending. She understood that now. It had been the thing that happened just before the clearing, the necessary, painful removal of everything that had been taking up the space, and in the space all of this, the work, the house, the light on the water. The man behind her with his chin on her shoulder, who had driven up from Beaufort in a truck that had seen better days carrying a worn canvas portfolio and a paper cup of coffee, and had noticed on his very first visit that she had already caught the access road problem. Dad knew, she said quietly. What did he know? She watched the light move across the marsh. That I was going to be more than fine. He just knew I had to find it on my own schedule. Cal pressed a long, slow kiss to the side of her head. Outside the kitchen window, the dahlias she had planted along the garden fence had come through their first season and were going to come back. She had been told they might not, this close to the salt air. They had anyway. Stubborn and amber and entirely their own, growing in exactly the direction they had decided on, which turned out to be the right one. Some women are quietly buried by the lives they were handed. They fold themselves smaller, year by year, fitting into spaces that were never made for them, and they call it love, and they call it enough, and they wait. Margot Weston was not that woman. She just needed 11 years, a dish towel, and a cold February morning to remember it. She got her father's patience and her own precision, and 4.1 billion quiet reasons to stop waiting. She got a man who brought dahlias because he had been paying attention. She got a porch on Sullivan's Island and a life that fit her completely. If this story landed somewhere inside you today, if you know someone who is holding on right now, who gave everything to the wrong person and is sitting in the quiet tonight wondering if anything good is still coming for them, tell them it is. Tell them it is already on its way. It was just waiting for the room to clear. And if this story moved something in you, drop a comment and let me know where you are watching from and what time it is there. Hit that like button, subscribe, and stay close, because there are more stories coming. Stories about people who got set aside and came back as something the world wasn't ready for. You won't want to miss a single one.